From Psalm chapter 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Surely my cup runneth over. Surely in goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I am struck, as I said yesterday at the end, how the 23rd Psalm so closely parallels the teaching in John chapter 10, where Jesus talks about the Good Shepherd. But what struck me even more as I tried to meditate on the 23rd Psalm was not so much the person, which is the Good Shepherd is the chief character, as it was the place. I read through Psalm 23 multiple times, trying to pay attention to the places where the shepherd was taking me. And I found three. He takes me to green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. And he leads me down the paths of righteousness. Those were like three different places where the shepherd is taking me in my life. And it was kind of nice because every once in a while you like to disengage and see, what is God doing with me? You're not living day to day anymore, but now month to month or year to year. And you're seeing a pattern that what God does with me is he takes me to certain places that are very much like green pastures and still waters and paths of righteousness. These three places are not the same places. In the original language in Hebrew in which Psalm 23 was written, green pastures simply means rich grass. It describes a place where animals can either bed down for the night or places where the grass is thick and green and they can nourish themselves on that. So green pastures is a place of plenty and fullness and contentment and satisfaction. God leads me in places where my soul is content, where I am satisfied, I'm fulfilled. Still waters describes places that are calm and tranquil. They are unruffled, they're quiet. It's a figure of speech in Hebrew that is sometimes used to describe the act of consoling another person or comforting with your words. So you can tell by the metaphor that still waters is something different than green pastures. Still waters is not so much a place of fullness and plenty and prosperity. It's a place of serenity. It's a place of margin and rest and ease and quietness. Right paths, the word literally means a trench, not just a path. So what it means is when you're in it, you can see that you've been there before. There's familiarity. It was like it was like a trench that either a line of people or animals, having walked it several years, have just sort of kind of beveled it into the ground. So again, there is clarity and there is consistency and pretty well-defined movement here. And that speaks more of integrity. It's a trench or a path that defines or is marked by righteousness. Tzedek in Hebrew, which is justice or moral goodness. So the shepherd leads me in trenches or patterns, ruts, if you will, of just behavior and goodness. But then the thought occurred to me as I looked at these things that I live in a society where people intuitively want these very things that the shepherd is leading me to. Say that in slow motion. Every human being, it does not matter how far they are from God, I believe instinctively desires green pastures. I've met and worked with some pretty far out and rebellious people, but I have never met or worked with anyone who said, if I do everything right, I will make my life a living hell. That's no one's goal. That's what it ends up being after a series of years, but it's never what people want. What people want are green pastures, but because they make some serious decisions and stupid decisions, they end up with hell. But that's not what they want. And I think they want the same thing for still waters. No matter how corrupt or how violent a person may be, I think there is something innate in their soul that just wants the chaos to end sometime. They want margin. Nobody wants to go 24/7 and fight for every last inch of their life. They end up doing that, but that's not what they want intuitively. And I think everybody wants innocence. I think everybody wants to know at the end of the day, or they want to think anyway at the end of the day, that they're right. It's why they argue. It's why they defend themselves. They excuse themselves. It's as if they know intuitively there's a standard out there somewhere, and I got to prove to you in this argument that I just met it. So it was perfectly okay for me to do what I just did. That's why they justify themselves, because there is some innate standard, some path of righteousness that they want. So when people move from purchase to purchase or from relationship to relationship, and when they throw themselves recklessly into the pursuit of more, when they are never content, when they overspend, when they overwork, when they overconsume and overcommit, I wonder if what they are really craving is green pastures. And when people get restless, when they wander aimlessly from one thing to the next, when they overreact, when they are caught in addictions, when they put on the bravado, when they seek revenge, when they resort to violence, I wonder if what they really want is still waters. And when they concoct their own religions and they chase after saviors on television or in Wall Street or on Capitol Hill, when they get buried under shame and they punish themselves for things that they did years ago, I wonder if deep inside what they really want are paths of righteousness. Where I'm going with this is, it dawned on me one day that the shepherd is taking me exactly where I want to go. Even in those seasons of my life where I'm fighting him and I'm sure he's wrong, He knows intuitively what my soul wants. And one of the reasons people will listen to my voice is because they suspect that I listen to His. When they ever start doubting that I hear His voice, they will start doubting mine. So my success as a shepherd depends so much on my capacity to hear His voice and to discern it while He's talking. And then to be able to communicate that to people that I'm trying to care for. In my first church, we heard a pastor's story last night. Here's one of mine. I'll be really, really fast about it. When you're in a small church in a large metropolitan area, Romulus, Michigan, you get exposed to a lot of situations that you wouldn't choose. So one of the things I did as a young pastor, if I had it to do over, I wouldn't have. But because I came out of college not knowing how to really do anything, I figured I needed experience. And my dad said, you should go down and tell the funeral director, if you ever have a family come in and they don't have a pastor, you'll do the funeral. That's what I did. That's what I wouldn't do again. Because you get a lot of the funerals that he described last night. On this particular one, they said that there had been two brothers who were in the middle of a fight in the house. And in the middle of the fight, the older brother took a baseball bat and hit his younger brother over the head. Knocked him not only unconscious, but he knocked him into a coma. So they took him to the hospital, and they came in and they arrested the older brother and put him in jail. And the younger brother, then taken off of life support because he was now brain dead, passed away within 24 hours. They called me and said, this family does not have a pastor. Would you be one? Yep. Thanks, Dad. So I remember gathering in this funeral home in Southgate, Michigan, and they were packing in the doors. They were hanging out. It was all over the place. Just before the funeral, the director pulled me aside and said, by the way, the Detroit Free Press, all the other papers are out there. They're waiting for information. They don't have any information on this incident right now. We don't want them to. Be careful what you say. So I went out and I did that funeral, but the problem was on the day that the brother in jail heard that his younger brother died, he hung himself. And then the family called me back 2 or 3 days later and said, would you come back now and do the funeral for the brother? So in a span of about 3 days, there was a homicide and a suicide in the same family. The second funeral is what grabbed my attention. While the first one was packed and it was lined with press and with family and with business leaders that knew the family, the second one was almost vacant. There must have been 40 people, maybe. Most of them were dressed in Gothic black, long black trenches. They had the lining on their faces. It was as if they were as part some kind of a covenant or something. And I preached the homily, which I can't remember, but at the end of the homily, I stepped to the head of the casket and I waited for people to file by the casket, and they did. And as people came by, I mean, remember, these guys are as far from God as you can imagine. As they came by, they were putting like cigarettes and like wine bottles and everything in the casket, thinking we want our good friend to take this to the afterlife. And all of a sudden, this one kid, short kid in the black coat, came by, and he stood in front of the casket for a second like this, and then just before he turned, he reached in his pocket and he pulled out a little piece of paper and he laid it right on the hands of the body, and he walked away. And when everybody had their pass, they were getting ready to close the casket, but the curiosity was just killing me. And so I found a way to sort of like, move over there while they were doing this, because I wanted to see what did he lay on this body. And when I got over and I looked down at it, it was a tract, and the cover of it said, "How to Find God." And I made a note to myself on that day. I was probably 24, 25 years old. And the note was, never underestimate the soul's desire for knowing God. Just because someone seems to you irreligious, just because they don't use all of the language, don't confuse that with a disinterest in God. They're just not interested in your religion, but they have an innate hunger to connect with something that is transcendent. They may not know what to call it. They may know nothing about him, but the writer of Ecclesiastes says he has put eternity in their hearts. And there are seasons in a person's life when eternity rises and shouts questions that no one can ignore. Which means it is possible then to shepherd people who are far from religion. In some cases, the further they are, the better it is. So you don't get trapped in Christian-esque language. The question then becomes, how do we do that? I'm going to present this and then I'll stop talking and we'll take feedback, okay? One of them is, I think when dealing with irreligious people, we have to shift the center of our language. We have to shift from a moral center to a wisdom center. They're different. Morality asks itself what is right, and it presumes a standard or a code of conduct. Wisdom literature asks itself what is wise, and it presumes a well-worn path of behavior. The punishment for breaking moral-centered things is condemnation, curse. The punishment for breaking wisdom-centered things is that you get beat up by life. You don't even have to believe in God. If you do things wrong, life will take its pound of flesh. Period. No matter what you believe. Be a Hindu if you want. You break this rule, this pattern that is woven into the Tao, or what C.S. Lewis calls the Tao. It's these principles that govern all of the universe. You break these things and you'll pay. So when we deal with irreligious people, the problem with religious people is we get stuck in a moral-centered language that doesn't connect with them. They don't care about that moral-centered language. Far better to deal with them from the book of Proverbs. than it is to deal with them from Paul's epistles. It's just a different part of the Bible. Second, in dealing with them, it is far better to use questions than it is to use answers. Far better to listen and to leave statements open-ended and to free people up to do what is their decision anyway, after you have pointed out where both paths lead. This is where wisdom literature just steps back and says, well, it seems like if you do this, that generally happens, and if you do that, well, that generally happens. Yeah, it's your call. It's far better to deal with that kind of a detachment than it is this evangelistic zeal that is trying to persuade them. Now, that being said, I want to talk about the center here of this. In my relationship with the Lord, who is my shepherd, I have him around me at all times, and I have in front of me the people numbering 3 to 12 that God has told me I should shepherd, at least at this season in my life. It seems there's two things that I need to focus on in here, and I'm going to call one presence. I'm going to call the other one absence. And they work like this. So they're kind of revolving like this. The ministry of presence is when I interpret God, my shepherd, to these people. Now, with my back to God, I am taking what He has said and I am trying to speak it into the people that I am responsible for. In the ministry of absence, I'm doing exactly the opposite. I now have my back to the people, and because I live with them and because I know them, I am now taking their circumstances with me into the presence of God. And I'm trying to interpret them to Him. Does that make sense? So in presence, I'm trying to interpret God to the people, and in absence, I'm trying to interpret the people to God. So the goal of presence is interpretation, and the goal of absence is intercession. Now, a couple things about the ministry of presence. One is what it means is when I am with these people, I have been with God. This presumes that I've been with God and I know God. Let every man glory in this, says Jeremiah, that he knows and understands me, for I am the Lord. Jeremiah 9:23 and 24. So I've done that background work. In presence, then, I take it with me into conversations, and there's two things that have to happen. One is I have to discipline myself to be fully present in the conversation that I am in right now. That means there's no looking at watches, there's no looking over someone's head, there's no waiting for a better conversation to come along. And because I work in College Town, there's no texting my friends while I'm talking to someone. There's no taking phone calls. What do you need another one for? You have a conversation. So it's learning to be fully present in the conversation that you're in so you can convey to that person. And by the way, only 7% of this is verbal. Over 90% of this is posture. It's facial expression. It's how you lean. It's how long you pause. It's tone of voice. All of those things are conveying importance to the person that you listen well. You restate what you think you heard. So I think what I'm hearing you say is, and when you interpret them and you get it right, you convey a feeling of, you heard me. So part of it is just staying fully present. That is, I mean, it's one thing to say this in a seminar, but it's another thing to be in the middle of a conference deluged by workers. So this has not come naturally for people. So this is something I have to work at continually all the time. So, and I'm not good at it, but what I've learned is that in my position, again, with 1,500 people who come to your service and they want access to you, the only way I know to work a Sunday is to be the last guy there, which seems like an incredibly dumb thing to do, because on Sunday mornings, I've been there since 4:30 in the morning. I get there at 4:30, and then we do 3 worship services. And so when the services are over, I'm working every room I can get in, and I'm the last guy to leave, 1:30, 1:45. I TiVo the Lions every Sunday in the fall, because that way you can fast forward to the loss. And people know by now, they're like, don't text Pastor Steve and say, whoa, what about that pick six? I don't want, no, don't do that. Because you're going to wreck his party, you know. Let him suffer at his own speed. So the point is that we're moving things in life and we're stretching the day out, because as absolutely worn out as you are at the end of a Sunday morning, it does give me more time to be looking at people for as long as they want to go. If you're in aisle 6 at Lowe's and someone just starts unloading and you said you'd be home with the stuff in 15 minutes, those things might have to change. You might just have to say, hang on a second, I told my wife I'm going to text her a second. Okay, good, now that's done. Now, get right back to it. The idea, though, is first to stay fully present in the moment while we are there. It's looking at them. And even if you're a real introvert and shy and kind of an ingrown, heady kind of person, you don't like to make eye contact. So that's just something you'll have to work on. The second way that we have to be present is that we have to be near a person in those critical moments of their life. As a rule of thumb, what I'm learning is that most people don't even know that they need a shepherd, and they sure don't want one until something goes wrong. And then when things go wrong, that's when people start looking for the shepherd. As a rule of thumb, people find their shepherds when their lives are in crisis. And remember, you can't identify someone that you're going to shepherd unless you already have pull with them. They have to identify you, and the time that they identify you is most likely to occur in a season of crisis. Some years ago, there was a guy in our church. I was in a meeting, and they came into the staff meeting, and they just said, Steve, would you take a phone call from one of the members of the church? I said, yeah, sure. So I stepped in, got it, and it was Gary. And Gary had gone into surgery, and the kind of cancer that he had was lining his entire stomach. So they found a surgeon, Dr. Sugarbaker, in Washington, D.C., only place that they do the surgery. And what they literally had to do was to open him up completely and take all of his organs out, and then basically peel the skin from the inside lining of his whole abdominal region. And then before they sewed him up, they filled it with chemo, liquid chemo, and then sewed him up and put him on a bed that was turning him like this slowly all 24 hours to move that chemo around. So you know him. Okay, yeah.
I know him, but he taught the surgeon that treated me.
Okay, yeah. He was in his last couple of years. And he's probably retired now. In fact, I think he's died. But he was going to train some others. So what happened was Gary had the surgery, and the recovery is worse than the disease. If it works, you're literally cured. Not remission, you're literally cured. So he called, and he was on the phone, and he was just like this. Now remember, this is an ex-Marine. He's a pilot. And I talked to him on the phone, and I just remember him saying, Steve, please pray, because if this doesn't stop, just pray that God would take me. I want to die. I want this whole thing to end. Connie will be okay. I've set her up. I just want to die. So we prayed on the phone, and as I hung up, I was going back to the staff meeting, and Jackie said, do you think you should go there? I said, I was just thinking the same thing. I'm going to step into the meeting. Will you check on tickets? By the time I got out of the meeting, she'd checked on flight tickets and had already set everything up. So when I came out of the meeting, I packed a few things in a duffel bag, and I got on the plane and flew to Washington, D.C., took a subway from there about 45 minutes out to the hospital, walked about a mile with my stuff over my back until I got to the hospital, and then walked into Gary's room. He was just absolutely floored. He had just heard from Dr. Sugarbaker that day who said, I think you're going to be okay, but the next few days are going to be hell. All that to say, Gary recovered fully. He has no cancer at all. He tells people what his testimony is, how God revealed himself to him on some road, has the whole thing. He asks if I'd come and speak to his organization with about 20 nursing homes. He's almost a billionaire now. And so when I stand up to get ready to speak to his organization, and he comes from the side and says, I want to introduce you. And as he got ready to introduce me, I had totally forgot about the Washington, D.C. thing. And he gets up and he says, let me tell you about the guy that's about to talk to you. There was a day when I was so sick with cancer that I almost died. Then, after the surgery, I wished I would. He said, and all of a sudden, one day, this guy, bald, ugly, tall preacher, gets up, and he's in my hospital room in Washington, D.C. for one day and turns around and leaves. And he said, as he walked out to go back to the plane, I said to my wife, anybody comes this far to see me, I'll follow him anywhere. Gary and I, to this day, are very, very close friends. Now he flies me. That's kind of a nice perk. But the idea was, he's looking for shepherding in a moment of crisis. Anyone who comes to see me this far in a moment like that, I'll follow them to the end of the earth. It would not have mattered how many house calls I would have made if they weren't at a time when he needed them. Let me move on to absence, and then I'm going to take a couple of comments from you. Absence is the art of intercession. This is where, having traveled with people for so long, I start to intuit what their needs. I know what they're afraid of, even though he won't tell me what he's afraid of. And I know what his values are, even though they should be something else. I know what he wants in life, even if he can't articulate it, because I know him. I know him. And now, with all of that knowledge in mind, I can represent him in prayer in a way that he cannot represent himself. Walter Eichroat's an Old Testament guy that Dennis Kinlaw turned me on to. And Eichroat raises the question of the Old Testament sacrificial system. The question is, when the priest goes in to intercede for the nation of Israel, what is happening behind the curtain? And the conclusion that Eichroat comes to is that the priest represents the nation who is behind him in that moment. He enters the Holy of Holies, and with knowledge of his people, he assumes full responsibility and he assumes the identity of the people. I am them. I am them. Whatever happens to me happens to them, and whatever God's going to do to them, he got to do it to me. So he immerses himself in the identity of the people, and in the art of intercession, he negotiates a deal. Such that things become possible for Israel that weren't possible before. That opened up a new door for me for interceding. I knew for a long time intercession was not just prayer. Intercession is focused prayer. When you intercede, you don't pray for 5 people in 1 hour. You pray 5 hours for one person. And when I read of Eichroth's summary of what the priest does, it opened up a possibility for what intercession could do. When I intercede, now, I bring the identity of the person, I wear them, in a sense, into the room with God. And I begin to speak to God for those other people. I almost take on their argument and their need and their disposition. And I speak to him as if I were them. And I tell him, give me whatever you're trying to give them. And I negotiate. I remember praying for this one instance. Our son, he doesn't know to this day that this happened. This is a kid that graduates from college and then from seminary, and he can't find a job. More than 100 applications and checks, and he can't find a job anywhere. And I just remember having, he's my boy, I know him, I'd die for him. And I remember going into a room and praying with God and just pacing most of the morning in there. And while I was pacing, there were 2 options. Either God was going to call him or he was not going to call him. I kept saying, are you sure God is not calling you into the ministry? Because and you got the training. And he's like, Dad, I don't want to be you. Well, I get that, but so we go around this. And I went into the room and I paced around and I just kept thinking, well, God, there's either you call him or you don't call him, so I'm going to spend an hour talking you into calling him. And I got about 2-3 hours into this thing, and all of a sudden, the passage began to emerge. Many are called, but few are chosen. And suddenly, there was a third way. Now it wasn't simply a choice between call him or don't call him. There was a third way. Even if you don't call him, choose him, favor him. Because if you favor him, the fix is in. It doesn't matter what he does. And it turns out in that prayer session that's what I wanted anyway. I wanted to be a minister because then I'd know how to help him. Anything else, I'm helpless, right? I know how to help with that. But that changed the nature of the prayer. The point being is when we bring people's lives into intercession with us and we negotiate with God, we frequently go in with 1 or 2 things, 1 or 2 options, and it is not uncommon for us to come out of that prayer time with a third way. Something we never anticipated praying for comes from that time of intercession. And when that third way emerges, there are possibilities now that we didn't have an hour ago. So, When we discern God's voice, we do that by staying in communion with God, by knowing God, and then by interpreting Him to people, and then interpreting people to Him. So for me, this is in the morning, usually the sanctuary, other rooms in the church, before staff get there, long before light, where I either pace or sit. I don't have a written list of who I pray for because it's never that long. If I just know who I'm praying for, and I cycle people on and off of that list. And I want it short because I think they have enough people who, God bless them. They have enough of those guys. I want a short list that I can devote intensive time to each person on that list. What they don't have is an intercessor. They have a lot of prayers. And so, again, you may find a way that's more pragmatic for you, and that would be fine. I would just encourage you in your prayer life to maybe include a period of time where you practice intercession. You won't be good at this at first. It will seem kind of stodgy and hard, and I don't know what else to say except please. But you'll get to the point where you can actually think out loud with God in a room, and you can almost banter with Him in a sense. I mean that in a positive, reverent sense. Until a third way emerges. Now, what I've noticed, though, when I looked at these two things, is that you probably are stronger at one and weaker at the other. So if you're an introvert like me and you love to be alone, then the ministry of absence is wonderful. You got to do your thing and get out of there, go up the mountain, meet with God for 40 days, come down for a half hour, then back up the mountain, you know? So you probably will have to discipline into your life the intentionality of being, listen for it, fully present with people in the room. My wife, on the other hand, loves presence. Holy cow. She's like 100 people. Just imagine the relationship potential. And I'm like, 100 people, holy cats, you know. So what she has to do is to discipline into her life intentionally seasons of alone time. Even when she gets up in the morning, meets in the corner of the living room, and it's not uncommon for her to be there for maybe 15 minutes. And then she's up and I got to do something, and I think. You know, so you can see her struggling with it, just like you see me struggling on Sundays. I look across the atrium and go, I was kind of hoping that guy wouldn't stay today. All right. I'm getting in trouble here now, yeah. Let me just stop talking and take any comments that you guys have. It's 3:17, and you guys are going to get your picture taken. So I got to get you out of here in about 2 or 3 minutes. But
please raise your hand so I know where to go.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can wrap this concept up in a short thing, but I think all of us in the class, as you've been teaching this, know that intuitively we have been doing this. Just you've put it on a piece of paper in which we can see it and understand it. The thing that I'm learning off of it is that Jesus is all about relationships, and we know we need to develop these relationships. We can't live in a cave, separate from people. It's not His way.
Yeah.
What I've learned from it, though, is that, say, in a marriage, you've done some marriage counseling, because a husband and wife can have different people groups. And it's situational awareness that there could be, you notice that you're conflicting with someone because one person's defending this other person and you don't understand why they're defending, and you're getting frustrated because this person's doing something wrong or whatever, and you're spatting between each other over this. But actually, you're protecting what you consider to be your sheep. But that sheep doesn't necessarily have to belong to your spouse.
Yeah.
So it's a situational awareness that with all this going on, and you notice that someone's getting defensive over somebody else, oh wait, maybe that's a sheep of theirs, just not of mine. Do you know what I'm saying? And it helps marriage go along a little better, if that makes sense.
Not everyone's, yep.
Yeah, because the people groups might just, I mean, the
Yep.
3 to 12 don't have to necessarily be a shared between a couple.
Right, yep.
And the way you're going to see that happening is when the protection comes in. And then the other person might be like,
Okay.
why are you protecting this person? This person's screwing up left and right, and you're being so protective, and it creates, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm fully
no,
defining
this
it.
is almost the Paul and Barnabas thing, isn't it? Remember they got in a fight over that? Where,
Yeah,
because
so
John
if you
Mark
can-
was going to,
If you can have this awareness of what's going on, then you can back off and go, oh, that's their sheep.
yeah.
And we don't need to fight over this. Don't know if that helps
No,
anybody,
that's-
but that has
that's-
helped me greatly.
That's great insight, it really is, yeah. Other comments or questions?
I hate for it to be me again, but
Yeah.
It made me uncomfortable at first when you said barter with God, or I don't know what word you used. Did you say barter?
Maybe broker or something.
Something
yeah,
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What'd I say?
Negotiate with God.
yeah.
Oh, I don't know if you can. Moses did that.
Yeah.
I said,
Yeah.
oh, yeah,
That's
no, it's
great.
okay. Moses did that so much. These people you gave me, you know?
Yeah. Well, and remember Abraham and the whole, if I can find 50, God
Right.
goes, 50 and you're on.
Right.
And Abraham's like, perfect. So 40 then, right? Yeah, that's right.
It's funny how what you're talking about is actually scriptural. It's weird.
That's cool. Anybody else?
I have
Yeah.
a quick question here. Okay. Looking at the presence and the absence thing. Let's say you're naturally a person of presence. You know, like you were describing your wife would
Yeah.
ready to jump out and be in a group of people and mingle, whatever. But sometimes it's hard to, focus yourself down into that one-on-one time to reconnect. Do you have advice or guidance to help that?
For people who are gifted
Who are
here?
naturally presence-oriented.
Of course not. I'm down here, bro.
I'm like,
That's right. Do we have, what? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'll jump into a crowd, no problem, man. To get me to sit down and focus, just to keep my head on one thought, is where I go back and forth. So it's like, okay, I need more strategies for that alone
Yeah.
time.
So who can help him? Somebody who is really good with other people and you know how to mingle well. Who can help this? Give some here. We got some help down here.
One of the things that I found, I'm kind of a mix, but being more of a present person, I found that if I have verbal conversation with God, that helps keep my mind focused, and I don't need to jump up and do something as often. Out loud, yes. And sometimes I even do it while I'm cooking dinner, or if I'm doing the laundry. When I had small children, the laundry was the best place to be, because they wouldn't come and look for me there. And
By
I could
verbal,
talk
do you
to
mean you're
God.
talking out loud?
I talk out loud,
Okay.
yes. I talk out loud and have a verbal conversation. Well, sometimes it is,
Yeah.
and sometimes it isn't.
I'm dying to hear from you now the rest of the story when you talk about the places that Psalm 23 takes you, because the continuation in my mind, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that's a place the Psalm takes us. I don't know if the Lord takes us that place. And then he takes us into the presence of mine enemies, and then he takes us to the house of the Lord forever. So I'll be here for that one too, okay?
Yeah. Odd thing about it is when he's in the valley of the shadow of death, I'm sure you've seen the observation before. It's the only place in the psalm where the pronoun changes, where the shepherd is no longer talking about God but to him. which is fascinating, isn't it? He says, the Lord is my, he maketh me, he leadeth me, he leadeth me. But when he gets in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou. So all of a sudden, in the worst crisis, God is present in a way that is peculiar to that valley. That seems to me peculiar. So I mean, it's a whole nother train of thought, but how do we find God in places where we are sure he is absent? You know, that becomes kind of a pursuit for me. One more right back here. Then we've got to let you go.
My only comment is about the still water. I'm reminded of the phrase that still water runs deep. And as opposed to a mountain stream coming down, the water's in turmoil and all foamed up and over the rapids. And we talk about a relationship, the still water is deep.
Wow. Wow, thank you, man. I have these little cards here. Some of you have asked if this material is available, and it's actually not available in a book, but I've told you how in our church we did this and how it spread across every domain, school teachers and contractors and CEOs and things like that, financial advisors. And what they were asking for was, how can I reproduce this in my office and show my employees? That was the question. So what I did was I created a 6-minute chalk talk. Basically what I've done right here with you, I created 6-minute chalk talks, one for each principal, and then we videoed those. And so those are available by video format, but they're not on YouTube or anything else. But if what this card just says is your name, your email address, and the name of your church, that's all that's on here. If you'll fill one, if you want those, then what I'll do is I'll bring these back to the office, and the media guy in our church will send you the link to these things. So you just go online and get them. And then if you want to use them in your school, your class, in your office, or your dorm, or something like that, and kind of use it as a training mechanism, you just got to show a 6-minute chalk talk, and then after that's over with, you can take over the meeting. It's your meeting, not mine. I'll just present the stuff, and then you lead them however you want, okay? So I'm going to hand these out, and you want to help hand these out. And then if you want that, you don't have to take one if you don't want, but I'm just going to pray, and then I'll dismiss us, okay? Father, thanks for the last few days that we've had here. I wasn't sure how it was going to go. You knew, and you have filled us with just great discussion, dialogue, with great minds in this room. I pray that you would anoint each person for the work to which you have called them. God, I pray that you would make them ministers wherever they serve and cause them to bond even more closely with those around them. Whatever part they can use, I know you'll multiply. So I just give them to you for the sake of the kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen. Love you guys. Thanks for coming, man. Thank you.